Hello everybody, how you doing? This is episode 3 of BTD5 Science. So what's going to go on today? I wanted to talk about evolution. So I realize evolution is a bit of a touchy subject, and I wanted to mention this before I even freaking start talking about it, that I am not trying to disprove God. I am not trying to disprove religion. I'm just trying to show you guys why evolution is a cool and interesting topic, and it definitely does actually exist and happen pretty much every single day. And I'm going to try and prove it to you guys, or at least show you some reasons why. And also, I wanted to show you guys this because if I start talking about some other science or biology things, this is a core concept of biology. And if you just don't believe this, you shouldn't even believe in biology really, because none of that even would make sense to you. So, anyways, let's get started here. You got to know genes. You have to understand what genes are. Well, if you know anything about biology, you know that humans are basically big blobs of DNA. Every single cell has their own set of DNA, which controls basically our entire body and makes our body work and do things and makes it look like how we do, our hair color, our height, pretty much everything. Exactly how we look, how smart we are. A lot of that stuff is based mostly on genes and then a little bit of environmental factors as well. So just keep that in mind that genes are extremely important in this, and you get basically 50% of your genes from your mom, 50% of your genes from your dad. So that basically says what you're going to look like and how you're going to be for the rest of your life. Also, guess what else has genes? Everything that's living has genes. Bacteria and animals and plants and everything you can possibly think of, except even viruses have DNA or RNA, and those aren't technically living, but they have that stuff. So let's talk about an easy topic for us, really freaking fast. How do you show that natural selection works? I wanted to talk about natural selection and then jump into evolution right after that. So, natural selection, what is it? Should I believe in natural selection? Well, if you're not going to believe in evolution, you better believe in natural selection for sure. You want me to show you what natural selection is really freaking fast, guys? This is natural selection. Let's say that you have a random tribe in Africa where the women only like men that are really tall. So you get a bunch of these women who only want tall guys, and over time, what's going to happen to the population? Well, the women are only going to mate with men who are really tall, and they're going to pass on a bunch of their tall genes. So eventually, you're going to get a bunch of people in that tribe that are taller. You know, you spread on the tall genes. The tall people are going to have more babies that are tall, and then those tall people are going to have even taller kids, and eventually, you're going to get an extremely tall race of humans, or at least that tribe is going to be extremely tall. You know. So that's really how that works, guys. Natural selection is just over time. All you need is one little thing that causes a slight change, and that's going to slowly change a species over time. You could also do the same thing with short people, or how fat they are, or how skinny they are. You know, Eskimos and stuff like that. Because they live in the cold, the ones that survived and the ones that had the most kids were the ones that were shorter, a little bit stubbier, and could deal with the cold a little bit better. You know, they had shorter arms, shorter noses, and things like that. Eskimos, they have things that got naturally selected for them. And places in Africa and stuff like that, they are mostly taller and skinnier because they got to survive and run around and catch things that are really fast, unlike little fat animals in the cold. You know, little seals and stuff like that. They're easy to catch. So that's just a quick little thing on how human natural selection. There's also things like bacterial natural selection. For example, bacteria have a lot of mutations in their genes. There's so many sets of DNA in that one bacteria. There's millions of them, and all you need is one little mistake when they're replicating it, and that's a mutation, guys. And it happens all the time. It really does. In fact, even us, we're actually born on average with two mutations in our DNA. So you're basically giving away two mutations every single time you have a baby or something like that. On average, of course, on average. So bacteria can also be naturally selected. You know, if you want to have the bacteria that's the best at surviving in, for example, heat, all you have to do is you have a million bacteria on a plate. You kill 90% of them, and then you let those 10% replicate a bunch, and you get another million of them. Once they get to a million, then you kill off 90% of them with more heat, and then you do it over and over and over again. And over time, what's going to happen is those little bacteria are going to get better at living in the heat, and you can basically make bacteria that are heat resistant and things like that. It happens with drugs all the time. You know, we have all these drugs that try and kill the bacteria, penicillin and stuff like that, and we used it over time. And what happened is the 5% that would survive that penicillin bred or just kept multiplying, and then slowly over time you had a bunch of resistant bacteria, and that's a big problem for us. So that's just basic natural selection. And then taking the jump into evolution and trying to understand how speciation can happen. Two different species from the same species. Well, I mean, that's a little bit harder to talk about, especially in 10 minutes. You can read books about it. That's how lots and lots of books about it. But I want to just give you guys a quick little understanding of how it could possibly have happened. So, natural selection is just small changes over time. And if you realize that over time is considering millions of years, we can see natural selection in just days, weeks, sometimes months, and years when it comes to humans and stuff like that, and big mammals, you can realize that over millions of years and thousands upon thousands of generations, those small changes can turn into pretty big changes. Little tiny giraffes with little necks can get really long necks, and little bacteria that are barely able to survive penicillin can now be fully resistant to penicillin. So they're pretty big changes. And sometimes what happens is you got this species, and you'll have one species that gets separated somehow, right, guys? You got a species. Let's say just randomly, an island breaks off. Okay, so now you have an island with this bird, and then you also have the bird on the mainland. On this island, it's a much different place to live. So you have these birds that are getting naturally selected to survive on something else that they're not really used to. They have to learn to eat different foods and stuff like that. And then all that it takes is that you realize that over time, over 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 years, that bird species on the island is much, much different than the bird species back on the mainland. And then when you put them together, maybe they can't breed anymore. And that's what speciation is. You just made a new species because these two things just slowly changed over time. So that's really natural selection for you at work, turning into evolution right there because you just made a new species. And if you talk about doing stuff like that over millions upon billions of years, it's easy to understand how a little fish can start using its fins as movers on shallow water and eventually turning into some sort of amphibian where it gets bones in those little fins and things like that. It's a little stretch for you guys if you don't understand everything 100%. But it makes sense to me, and if you read a couple books about it, it'll definitely make sense to you. So I wanted to talk about these 5 reasons why evolution should exist, or you guys should believe in it, or whatever you want to call it. Number 1 is the universal genetic code. So everything has DNA that lives. Basically, everything has DNA that lives, except for some random things that actually use RNA. But if you actually go back, you'll realize that chimps have 96% the same, not 96, I think 98% the same DNA as humans. Don't quote me on that, it might be 96 or so. Once you get down to dogs and stuff like that, it's more like 80%. And then eventually, once you get down to things that are not quite as closely related, we still have 50% the same DNA as a banana. A banana! 50% the same DNA. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that we have a lot of the same commonalities in our DNA. Because that's what it takes to survive, the ability to make your cells actually work. And, cells in bananas still have to work, and that's why they use those genes still. The fossil record. So that's a good one. The fossil record shows that animals change over time. Things that used to have smaller bones eventually grew bigger bones. And you can just see this in the fossil record if you notice over time. Now, the only real problem with the fossil record is that we don't have millions upon millions upon millions of little animals of the same kind. We can only find so many of them, so finding the missing links in between is sort of tough. But we have done quite a few things and found really good ways or really good things in the fossil record that links all these things together. And it's actually quite interesting how well they actually link together. It's kind of crazy, actually. Genetic commonalities, that's pretty much the same thing as the universal genetic code, but what you're going to realize is that the genetic commonalities basically means we have a lot of the same genes and a lot of the same ways that our DNA works together, and DNA is pretty much the exact same, all 4 sets of code and everything for every single living thing on Earth. Common traits in embryos. This is more for like mammals and reptiles and things like that. When they are when they've just been conceived and they are just a couple weeks technically old inside the female still, you can start getting when you look at the embryos, they all basically the exact alike. And in fact, if you look at a human embryo, it actually has a tail. And what happens is over time, this embryo changes into the correct form of the human baby and stuff like that. But all these things have tails and stuff like that. That was back. That was good, or that's what the animals used to turn into back in the day. Also, I kind of mentioned this already, but bacterial resistance to antibiotics. Just over time, you'll notice that the small changes like natural selection and stuff like that turn into big changes, especially when you have things that reproduce really rapidly, like bacteria. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me on this, and you can go ahead. You don't have to believe me on this, but it's 100% true, and I'm even going to put a picture here for you right at the end, trying to help you, trying to prove it to you. Now, there is a big debate whether we came from the great apes. Yeah, did we evolve from monkeys and apes and things like that? Oh my god, it's crazy. Did we do it? Yes, we did. Now, we didn't come from a gorilla. You have to understand that. It wasn't just like a gorilla magically turned into a human one day. No, slowly over time, what happened is humans slowly evolved to have a bigger and bigger brain. The natural selection basically uh, wants the fittest to survive. Not the biggest, not the strongest, not the best. The fittest for that environment is going to survive. And what happened is humans over time, the ones that survived the best were the ones that were the smartest. Not the biggest and not the strongest. So slowly over time humans got smarter. So like I was telling you guys about genes and stuff like that, genes are really set up in almost the exact same way in a lot of animals, especially closely related animals. You'll see how closely they are related. And what happens is all this DNA is actually stored up into these things called chromosomes. And chromosomes, if you know anything about chromosomes, they're extremely, extremely cool. And they help us understand animals and biology quite a bit. So great apes and chimpanzees and gorillas and things like that all have 48 chromosomes, but humans only have 46 chromosomes. You have to understand that these are pairs of chromosomes, so basically we have two of the exact same chromosome all the way through. So we have 23 pairs, and gorillas and stuff have 24 pairs. So how did you make that jump from 24 pairs to 23 pairs? Oh my goodness, this is crazy, guys. We can't possibly do that. Yeah, it happens all the time, actually, in animals. All the time. I'm not joking with you guys. You might think it's a crazy thing to happen, but you got millions upon billions of animals all over the place, and it's easy to have mutations happen. In fact, Down syndrome is just a mutation where we have an extra chromosome 21. And the issue is that a lot of the times it just causes diseases and it causes problems, but every once in a while it doesn't cause a problem and it actually can cause a benefit to the animal. Doesn't even have to be a big benefit. It could be a tiny, tiny benefit, but over time, that tiny, tiny benefit leads to that change, that slow, gradual change into that species, that person, or that type of animal with that mutation winning out in the long run. And that's all it takes is that tiny little benefit. So, how do we get from 48 chromosomes to 46? Well, I'll show you this picture right here. This is a picture of uh, the chimp genome of all the chromosomes and the human genome of all the chromosomes, and it basically shows that what happened is that uh, the second chromosome in the chimps or the gorillas or whatever, the common ancestor really, uh, basically got transferred into and binded to another one. So it's called a fusion. You have a fusion of these two chromosomes, and it just added that little tiny benefit to the humans, and that allowed them to win out. So if you're noticing, there's reasons why this makes sense. What happens is you have these telomeres on the end of the chromosomes, and you can actually see these telomeres uh, on human chromosomes and chimp chromosomes and stuff like that. And when you look at the human chromosome, you notice that we have a sort of messed up telomere. The telomeres are not at the edges of the chromosome on chromosome number 2. There's some in the middle, which is weird. It means there had to have been a chromosome fusion. So that's really one of the main reasons why we think, that this is good DNA evidence for why some sort of ancestor to gorillas and humans and chimps and things like that probably came out to be humans. Now, there's quite a few other things I could talk about trying to explain how gorillas evolved into human, or not gorillas, how a great ape eventually evolved into a human and things like that. But I'm going to leave that, and hopefully you guys can just understand this. If you want to find out more, feel free to read some books about it and watch some YouTube videos about it. I just don't recommend you going to a creationism website and learning about how these are all false, because I can literally, every single argument you bring up, I can basically prove it wrong. I actually read a few of these arguments just to see how valid they were, and they're not very smart at all. They actually sounded kind of silly for the most part. So they actually didn't use facts. They used a lot of silly nonsense that they tried to trick people with, which I didn't really like at all. So, anyways, that's all I got for you guys today. If you liked this stuff, please press like. If you have any problems with it, please tell me in the comments. Now, I also would really like it if you guys did not start arguing all over the place in the comments. I cannot answer all your crazy questions because you know what? I know there's going to be a lot of questions about this. So I will do my best to try and explain this stuff to you guys if you guys need an update video or something like that to try and answer your questions. But that's all I got for you guys today, so thank you for watching and have a good one.